Okay, so we are starting out today on the bottom of Zayin Vase, last last couple of lines, two dots. The Gemara tells us as follows: Amar le Rabbi Yitzchak le Rav Nachman. Rabbi Yitzchak says to Rav Nachman, "My time of osi mar lebei knishta. Why did you not come to shul? Let's to daven." Amar le lechilni. He says I wasn't able to. He wasn't feeling well. So he says, Amar le lechanfein lemar asar v'litzli. So why didn't you get together a minion to come down with you in your house? Amar le trichli milsa. He says it was a big tircha to get a minion together to come to my house. It's too complicated. So he says, "V'lei malei mar l'shlucha d'tzibura b'idna d'masa d'tzibura leisi v'lei duye lemar." So maybe what you should have done is had somebody come from the shul to come let you know what time the shul was davening. So Amarle, my kulei. He says, well, why are you bugging me to do all these things? In other words, Menachem is saying, it's enough, let it be. I couldn't come to shul, wasn't feeling well. You told me I should have a minion in my house. I can't have a minion in my house. And then he says, you should have the shul come tell me exactly what they're up to. Why do I have to be bothered so much? Amarle. So Rabbi Yitzchak says to Rabbi Nachman, the Amar of Yechanan, Mishum Mishum Menachai, because Rabbi Yechanan said the name of Mishum Menachai, my Dechsib, what's it mean when it says in Pasuk, Vani Tfilosi Lecha Hashem Eis Ratzain? What does it mean when it says in Pasuk that my tefillah to you, Rebbeinu Shalom, should be Eis Ratzain? It should be an Eis Ratzin. Emasai Eis Ratzin. What is it in Eis Ratzin? Bisho Tzibur Mispalin. It's an Eis Ratzin when the Tzibur is davening. That is to say, you, Rav Nachman, are davening alone because you're not feeling well. Okay, so you can't get a minion together in your house. But at least you should daven the time that Tzibur is davening, because at that time it's a specific time of Eis Ratzah. I should mention, and what it tells us later on in Brachot Chav Chetzam and Beis, what it tells us over there, a Maisa that happened with Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef used to give a shir on Shabbos, and even though he was blind, he knew who came to the shir. So the Gemara says there on the top of Chav Chetzam and Beis, the Rav Avya Cholash, Rav Avya was sick. He didn't come. He didn't come to the shir. So Rav Yosef somehow knew that. He's upset about it, and Baya tries to mollify him by asking in front of Rav Yosef, asking Rav Avia why he didn't come to why he didn't come to the shir. So he says I wasn't feeling well. He says if you weren't feeling well, it was mashma the lack of feeling well was because he hadn't eaten. So he said, so why didn't you eat? He says I can't eat before Musaf. He says, you can't eat before Musaf. So daven Musaf. How can I daven Musaf early before the tzibur? So he says to him, what's the problem? The davening early before the tzibur is only a problem when you're with the tzibur. In other words, if you're in shul, you can't daven before the tzibur. But if you're at home, you can daven before the tzibur. What does it mean? We just said that you shouldn't daven. You should supposed to daven when the tzibur davens. So again, it's a question of priority. It's a value trade. Ultimately, if one has to make a choice between coming to shul, or davening at home, and being able to make this year, and that means you're gonna have to daven at a time when the tzibur is not davening. Is that better than waiting till the tzibur davens and then missing this year? And the answer, no. Better to daven early before the tzibur davens, so you can make it to this year. But if you don't have that kind of excuse going on, then of course you should be davening at the time that the tzibur davens, because that is the time that is the most Eis Ratzon. As I mentioned already before, we discussed this in Shulchan Aruch, in Aruch Chaim, Siman Tzadi, Halacha Tes. The lashon of the Shulchan Aruch was Yishtadel Adam Lespal. A person should try to daven in the Beis Knesset with the tzibur. V'himu honest, and if the person is not doing well for whatever the reason is, but he's an einus, so any yochel level of Beis Knesset that he can't come to the shul. So then Yechavan Lespala B'Shosha Tzibur Mispal. Then you should try to daven at the time that the tzibur is davening. But the word is hishtadlus to daven with the tzibur in the Beis Knesset. But it doesn't use a lashon of chiyuv. It's using a lashon of hishtadlus. But what's the p'tur? If you just say that the chiyuv is just hishtadlus, it's not an actual fundamental chiyuv. Then what does it mean? The second part of the Shulchan Aruch, v'himu einus. What do you mean if you're an einus? You should have any excuse. You don't have to be an einus just to have. If it's not a full chiyuv, then if you can't, you can't. Why does it have to be einus? It must be that there's a bit of a balance here. On the one hand, yishtadel, but there is only good excuse if you're an einus. You have to have a good excuse, even though we're not saying it's an absolute chiyuv on you to daven with a minion. because the only way out of it is if you're an Einis. So in this situation, Rav Yitzchak is telling Rav Nachman, you could have done a little bit more effort over here in order to make the, even if you can't make the tefillah b'tzibur, even if you can't have a minyan in your house, but at least what you could have done is daven at the time of the tzibur, because that would be a time of Eis Rot. And I should mention, because we already talked about this a little bit on Vav and Aleph, that the Rif here puts these two Gemaras together. If you remember the Gemara on Vav and Aleph, you look in the Rif here on the Daf Rif, it's Daf Dalid and the Daf Rif. So the Rif said the following. Says the Rif, very interesting, the Abba Ben Yamin Gemara with our Gemara. What was the Abba Ben Yamin Gemara? Remember the Gemara on Vav and Aleph, Abba Ben Yamin Omer, Ein Tfilosa Shel Adam Nishmas El V'Sakna. It says, a person's tefillah is only going to be heard in the shul. Shneim L'Shmer L'Rina V'El Tefillah, M'Makim Min Hashem Tei Tefillah. Wherever you have Rina, that's where you have tefillah. This is about 7-8 lines from the top. That was the Gemara in Vav and Aleph, that you have to daven in a shul. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Mishum Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra. So the Rif is quoting Rabbi Yechanan, the name of Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra. Our Gemara has it, Rabbi Yechanan, the name of Shimra Yechai. Either way, so the Rif continues, and the Rif says, this member, the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that Ein Tfilosa Shalom Nishmas El Beis HaKnesses, the person's tefillah is only heard in shul, which is what? The exact line of Abba Ben Yamin. But that's not the line of what we're saying over here. We're saying the line here from Rabbi Yechanan was the lashon of Emasai Yisrat and Mishah Shatziv Mispalan. But here we have the line of Abba Ben Yamin again, that tefillah of a person is only Nishmas Beis HaKnesses. And what's the source? Our Gemara. Shneim V'ani Tfilah Sidduch Hashem Yisratzen Emasai Yisrat and Mishah Shatziv Mispalan. Do you see how what the Rif is doing? The Rif is taking the Gemara from before of Abba Ben Yamin, the same member of Abba Ben Yamin, that ain't Tfilos and Shmas El Beis HaKnesses, applying that together with the fact that when is it an Eitz Ratzon? Only when the Tzibur is Mispalan. So you have both together, right? So when is it an Eitz Ratzon? Only when the Tzibur is davening, and the tefillah of a person has to be in shul where the Tzibur is davening. And here, if you look at the Rabbeinu Yonah brings out what we already said before. What did we say before? We said Rabbeinu Yonah in the Amos Eitz Ratzon says Rabbeinu Yonah, quoting from the Gaonim, that a person can't go to shul. Again, presumably he's an Einis. Whatever the reason is, he can't go to shul. Says Rabbeinu Yonah, Yesh lo l'shar tefillah sheyispal b'shoshem espal hakol. He should daven when the tzibur is davening. And even when the tzibur is not davening, then what should a person do? Yesh lo l'adam l'spal b'sakneses. Person should still daven in the shul, even if the tzibur is not davening. You should still go to the shul and daven with the tzibur. Because the basic necessity is where you daven better. You're not going to daven so good in your house. Daven in the shul, even if the tzibur is not davening at that time. And when do we say the idea that the tefillah of a person is only heard in a shul? That is only with regards to a person whose terasa is not umnasei. But a person who is terasa umnasei is able to daven in his own base medrash. We'll have to see that more later on at the end of this daf. So again, what do we see from here? This is Taisus Avodah Zarah Dalan Beis, right? Taisus Avodah Zarah Dalan Beis did not bring down this different girsa of the Rif, but clearly he was influenced by that because Taisus understood in that Gemara there, the same, which is the Gemara on Bavim and Aleph, that what is Abba Ben Yamin telling us? Abba Ben Yamin is telling us, "Ein tfilas and nishmas el beis hakneses." What do you mean your tefillah is not heard except if it's in the shul? If it's in the shul and the tzibur is davening, obviously that's what we're talking about. But of course, if there's no tzibur, you should still daven in the shul. And that's what we quote also from the Kesef Mishnah and others, that there's a fundamental point that Abba Ben Yamin was teaching us, was not just davening in the shul with the tzibur, but it was davening in the shul itself, even if not a tzibur. And obviously, a person should always try to be davening with a tzibur. So those are the two things, and that's why the Rif and Taisus are all putting them together. Abba Ben Yamin with this memra from Rabbi Yechanan. Continues the Gemara. So another source to understand what it means it's an Eitz Ratzon. Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina Amar Mehafa, a different source to tell you when it's an Eitz Ratzon. K'Amar Hashem be'Eitz Ratzon Anisecha. When it's an Eitz Ratzon, I will answer you. Again, when is it an Eitz Ratzon? When the tzibur is going to be davening. Rabbi Chanina Amar Mehafa, when is it an Eitz Ratzon? Hein El Kabir, right? Our Rebbeinu Shalom is very strong. V'lo Yamas, he doesn't find disgusting. What does he not find disgusting? What is the Rebbeinu Shalom very strong? We have another passage that tells us, Poile v'shalom nafshi. Hashem is going to be paid my nefesh in peace, mikarovli, from those that are fighting with me. Ki berabim hayu imadi. When is Hashem going to pay my nefesh in peace from those that are fighting with me? When is that time? Ki berabim hayu imadi. Because when there are many, when there are rabbim with me. In other words, the whole idea here is that the rabbim that are with me are going to enable the Rebbeinu Shalom to put my nefesh in peace. That is to say, this is the tzibur. It's davening with the tzibur. That's the Yisrael. That's when you get the pada b'shalom nafshi mikrovli because of the rabbim that were hayu imadi. Continues the Gemara. Another source to this, Tanya Amelch, have a price like this as well. Rabbi Nasanem and Nanshi and Hakadosh Baruch Hu Mayis b'tzilas and sharabim. How do you know that Hashem is never going to be Mayis? Right? Hashem is never going to find disgusting the tefillah of the rabbim. Shenem el kabir v'lo yamas. Right? Hashem is very strong. He doesn't find disgusting. What does he not find disgusting? Hashem will be put in my nefesh in peace when those that are fighting me. When? When there are those that are with me, that are davening with me, at that point, then I will be able to be answered. That will be the Eisrat. And so a few sources to basically give over the same point, right? What is the same fundamental point? That it's an Eisrat when you're davening with a tzibur. Good? Finish the Gemara and says as follows. Amar, we got Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God, as it were, says, Kol ha'isek b'Torah u'mugimilas chasadim u'mispal matzibur. That anybody who learns Torah is isek in chesed and davens with a minyan. Ma'ila ani Allah kilu padaini li ulivni mibein u'masam. As though that person was paid to me. Hashem saying about himself, as it were, and my children from the nations. Says Rashi, what do we mean over here? That we're talking about people that are Isaac and Shalom, right? We're talking about Pada B'Shalom Nafshi, you're redeeming my soul in peace. I'll give you an example. What does it mean? These are the things that have to do with peace. Says Rashi, in Pada B'Shalom, Zesh Asaf B'Divrei Shalom. Somebody who's Isaac and Shalom, what are the examples of that? For example, Torah. What does it say in the Pasuk? Chon Sivas Shalom. Rashi has a very interesting psychological insight. How is Gemilas Chesed Shalom? From the fact that a person is doing good for somebody with his guf, he's actually physically working to help somebody else out. The friend is who makish who I have it. The friend recognizes that this person really loves him, really likes him, appreciates him, and that will cause peace to exist. That will cause there to be shalom between folks, and then therefore that will enable the Rebbeinu Shalom and the Jewish people to become redeemed from the Ummah Ta'olam. Of course, this can be well understood as the idea that the reason for the Beis Hamikdash not being rebuilt is the lack of shalom bayas, because as the Gemara tells us in Yuma Testament Beis, that the second Beis Hamikdash was chara because of the sinas chinam among us. So obviously, if somebody has shalom, then he's able to be paid to the Rebbeinu Shalom and ourselves from the Ummah Yisraelim. Okay, continues the Gemara. The Gemara says as follows. I should just mention maybe the Rif. The Rif has a different gears over here. The Rif, again back on Daled Amud Aleph, the Rif says Kol Isik B'Torah Ugemilas Chasadim Umatzoi B'Beis HaKnesses, and he's found in shul. Right. So what did we say? Somebody who is Isaac B'Torah Gemilas Chasadim Umispal Matzibur, and the Rif is saying not that he's davening with the tzibur, but he's found in shul. I don't know if anybody's here ever been to Landau's or Shemer Shabbos in Brooklyn, but you know what it means to be motzi beis haknesses. There are people that they're just always in shul. What do they do? I don't know what they do, but they're just there. They're always there. When you go back, to Brooklyn after all these years, they're still there. It's amazing. The whole life they're there. So they take the Rif literally. If you look at Rabbeinu Yonah and others, it's what does it mean? He's in shul. He's found in shul. He's found in shul. He's davening. He's not loitering around the shul all day. That's presumably what the person is doing. That he's being quote unquote found in the shul. Okay. Continues the Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows: Reish Lakish, Amar Reish Lakish, Kol mi sheyesh lebeis haknesses be'iroi. Anyone who has a shul in his community, ve'ena nichnas sham, it doesn't go to daven there. Ve'ena nichnas sham l'spal nikra shachin ra. He's called a bad neighbor. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, "Kayom Hashem al kol shchinei haroim hanoigim b'nachala asher inchalti esami es Yisrael." So says God on all the bad neighbors that are touching the inheritance that He's given to the Jewish people. and not only that, El Shagirim Golos Lo Levanov, he's going to cause Golos, is going to cause the exile for him and his children. Hashem says, I'm going to pluck them from the lands and send them into Golos. That's Beis Yehuda Atosh Mitecham, right? And the Beis Yehuda, the Jewish people, I will save from them. What's the connection here to do with Shalom, presumably? Right, we just said that someone who's engaged in Torah Chasadim and he's davening the tzibur or he's loitering around in the shul, so he's bringing Shalom in the world, because these are all actions of Shalom. But somebody who has a shul in his neighborhood and doesn't daven there, right, in a fashion that would be considered not Shalom, so that would be considered a Shachin Ra. Just to mention that. That Shulchan Aruch brings it down halacha there in Sivan Sadi halacha Yud, halacha Yud Alf. I'm sorry. He says, "Mishi yesh b'sagneses be'ira ve'ena nichnas b'lis ba'al nekir shachin ra." V'garim go loyal levan. If somebody has a shul in the neighborhood, they don't daven deliberately as a way of saying, "I'm not davening in that shul." They're going to close galus. They're considered a bad neighbor. I should point out that the Magen Avraham writes that there could be a good reason, because we have another source. The Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us, Kuf Zayin, that a person gets schar for all the psias that he takes to go to shul. So if there's a shul that's far away distant and he wants to go there in order to get a lot of psias, then he can be midan makav schos, that he has a good reason because he wants to go to get the extra schar of the psias. But obviously the general point is, if somebody is, what the joke is about the how many shuls they need for one Jew, you need to have two, the one that you daven and one that you don't daven in. So, the idea being that if a person is not going to a specific shul mitzvah shalom issue, doesn't want to daven there, so then it's considered a shachin ra. But just to go to get extra schar, to get extra psias, to go walk into a far shul because he wants to get more schar, so that's nothing wrong with that. Continues the Gemara and says the Gemara as follows. We're at the dot, about 4 lines down from the intermediate wide lines. Yeah, Amr le Rabbi Yechanan. They said to Rabbi Yochanan, "Ika sabi beBavel, there are old men in Bavel." Tama v'Omar, he was shocked. Rabbi Yochanan, that he heard that there's old men in Bavel. Pasuk says, "L'man yirbu yimechem, yimei v'nechem, alo adama." It says in Pasuk that if you're doing all the commands of the Rebbeinu Shalom, you're going to have Arichas Yomim. Where alo adama? Where's alo adama? In Eretz Yisrael. How are you going to have Arichas Yomim in Bavel? Rabbi Yochanan was shocked. There's old people in Bavel. How could it be? It shouldn't be old people in Chutz La'aretz. So the Gemara says that they told them, no, you have to understand, in Bavel they're special. Even the Amri they told them they come early and late to shul, meaning they're coming, as Rashi says, one of the means they're coming, they are long in the shul, they stay in the shul a long time. Maybe this is the ride to the Rif. They're loitering around the shul. What does it mean? So I thought once that what Rashi is trying to tell you, if you look at the Rashi, Mechashki Arvis, they come at night when from Ma'ariv. They are staying longer in the shul. What do you mean Ma'arichem Ma'ariv? What's the Ma'arich? What's the length of shul when you're coming from Ma'ariv? Ma'ariv is not that long. What's the mean Ma'arichem? So I thought maybe this was a Rashi, what he was referring to. What does it mean Ma'arichem V'Sakneses? Because they came to daven Mincha and they're staying with Ma'ariv too. Maybe that's what Marich means. But now I wonder if maybe Rashi is really referring to the Gemara in Dalan and Beis we had before. Right? Remember the Gemara in Dalan and Beis that told us, what should he do when he comes home from the field? He shouldn't go straight home. What he should do is first go to the shul. And what should he do in the shul? Well, if he knows how to read, he should read the Tanakh. If he knows how to learn, he should learn. And then he should say Kriya Shema, he should daven, and then he should only go home. Maybe that's what it means, Marich Beis Knesses. Marich Beis Knesses, because you're coming home, you're learning, you're davening, whatever it is, but it's going to be a whole procedure. Mincha, you already daven in the field. Mincha, you daven already before. Could be. Either one. I think I'm more leaning now towards that understanding of Rashi saying. I should also point out that for Rabbi Yochanan, this is maybe again another example of Rabbi Yochanan L'Shitase. Remember, we had a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan. We talked about it before, about if you have to be soymech gul tefillah shel arvis, right? The more dalam base told us the machlokes of Shimon Levi and Rabbi Yochanan. We also brought down, we were talking too, that there is according to different girses of the Gemara later on the Gemara told us that what do you call the mice of if Tfilas Arvis was Rishus or not. So we had a machlekes there by Rava and also Rabbi Yechanan if it's a chayv or not. So we held that Rabbi Yechanan holds that Tfilas Arvis is a chayv, right? He holds that you have to daven Marav. It's not a Rishus. So again, if somebody's telling Rabbi Yechanan that the people in Bavel are coming to shul and they're coming to shul to daven Ma'ariv, so then okay. So these are not people who are saying Ma'ariv is a rishus. Maybe that is part of what enabled them to understand how there could be old people in Bavel. Either way, so that's how Rabbi Yechanan understands now. He's not so shocked that there's old people in Bavel. Amar Hainu Da'ani says that's why they are having success at living a long life. Kadam Rav Shimon Levi Libnai, like Rav Shimon Levi said to his son, Kadim Chashichu V'Ailu Be'Kanishta, you should come in the morning and the evening to shul. So they should be able to live a long life, right? This comes clearly. Rav Shimon Levi was telling his son to come to shul to daven Ma'ariv, right? Rabbi Shimon Levi is not in this machlekes of whether or not Ma'ariv is a rishus or a chayva. Rabbi Shimon Levi is in machlekes about whether or not the tefillas of Ma'ariv required smichas geula tefillah. Rabbi Shimon Levi held it did not. Right, so Shema, the main mitzvah of Shema, as we pointed out, is al amida. Rabbi Shimon Levi in a literal way, while we don't take the mitzvah literally because we're already doing that earlier. Because we hold smichas geula tefillah is what's actually required. Okay. Nevertheless, we're still connecting this Shita Rabbi Yechanan with Rabbi Shimon Levi as well. Okay, continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Acha Rabbi Chanina. We want to understand what does it mean in pasuk. Ma'ikra Ashri Adam Sheme'ali Lishkoid Al Dol Soisa Yom Yom Lishma Mezuzais Pischi. What does it mean in pasuk? We're praising the person who's listening to me. He's watching on my doors day after day, and he's watching over the doorways, the mezuzos of my Pischi, all the time, right? Uchsiv Basrei. And right after the pasuk tells us there, Mishlei, somebody who's found me, right, has found life itself. What does this mean? What is this understanding of this verse in Mishlei? So what do you call it? The Gemara continues, and the Gemara explains as follows: that, or I should first say before we go further, that what this is according to Rav Acha Bar Chanina, is a further explanation or elucidation on what Rabbi Yechanan said. Rabbi Yechanan said that he can understand how the people in Bavel can live long because of the fact that they come to shul in the morning and the evening. So the idea of finding the Rebbeinu Shalom, it gives life. So Ashri Adam Shemei Li, somebody who's listening to me and he's watching my doors. In other words, he's coming to shul. He's watching over my doorways. He's always in shul. So that's like it's like he's found me and therefore he's found life itself. In other words, that's the source for the idea of living long. Okay. Amar Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda adds now another idea going back on this pasuk of what does it mean lishmar mezuzos pischi, to watch over the doorways of my entrances. Right, again, we're talking about shuls. So Rav Chizda says the person should always enter into two doorways into a shul. The Gemara says shnei psachim sakadai. If you mean literally two doors, you have to come in through like two doors to get in. Like if you have one door, not enough. Should we like tell my wife we have to make instruction? We have to put in a second doorway in order to walk into a shul. So the Gemara says no, it doesn't mean literally have to be two doors. You should have a shear of two doorways in order to be able to sit down. Don't it's also good zoning practice, right? Not to block your doorway and have a seat right next to the door. It's good to have a space of at least two doorways, which, if you think about a doorway, it's not very big, but at least you shouldn't be so close to the door. Why not? Says Rashi. It's a vort in being two doorways, close to two doorways. You should have the width of two doorways to enter before you sit down. You shouldn't sit right next to the door. The nira alav kemasoi. Because what does it look like? It looks like davening is a burden for you. It's not much like it's holding you back. And you're waiting by the door, ready to spring out, ready to jump out. And if you remember, we just had this Gemara before. The Gemara told us in Bavim and Beis that a person shouldn't run out of shul. You shouldn't be that first guy who's waiting to shul, like, okay, out, and I'm running. Again, if somebody has a good excuse, they have to leave, they have to go to work, they have to learn, whatever it is. Of course, that's not an issue. As we already pointed out, the Mishnah Berurah says that anybody has a good reason to go is 100% allowed to run out of shul. Somebody who doesn't have a good reason to go, they just can't stand shul, so they're waiting to run out. That's what we're talking about. And the Rashi uses the same lotion over there. It's nero love kamasu. It seems like a burden to you. Shul's a burden. So again, we don't want shul to be a burden for people. We want you to be able to appreciate why you're there. And so therefore, if a person sits right next to the door, it sounds like he's having not a great experience and he wants to rush out. Says Rashi. I'm sorry, says the Mechaber. We just did Rashi, right? Says the Mechaber. This is again, it's in study there, and this time in Halacha Chav. Says, and this is all based on Rabbeinu Yonah. We're not going through Rabbeinu Yonah now, but it's all coming from the Rabbeinu Yonah. So says the Machaber, what does it mean? A person should first come into the shul a width of 2 doorways before he davens. Yesh mefarshim shiur b'shnei psachim. What there are those that want to explain what is the shear of 2 doorways? Dahainu ches tfachim. Ches tfachim. You know what I mean? Like ches tfachim. I tell you how much you have to come in. Fine, right? That will be a fire hazard. Ches tfachim. You can't sit within ches tfachim of the exit to a shul. Fine, okay. Nevertheless, so that's one way you're able to make time this halacha. It's going to be sitting next to the door. It's like your burden to you to come to the shul. But someone has a seat, that's his makam kavua next to the door, then it's not seen like a masui. If that's your makam kavua, it's not a problem. Says Mechaber the Ben Yonah, you're allowed to sit there, not an issue at all. Meaning, someone has a seat that's closest to the door shouldn't feel bad about himself that it looks like he's like rushing out. No, we know why he wants to sit next to it. He wants to see everybody's coming in, take a Shabbos, know what's going on, catch up. We know the people have to sit next to the door. It's a style. But we're saying it the other way. Don't say it's a masui for the person who's sitting by there that no one's allowed to take that seat. No, you can take the seat. Not an issue. That's your regular seat. It's not a problem. Continues the Mechaber. The Mechaber says, V'yesh mefarshim. You know, we know the people like to sit by the doors because they like to look outside, right? They like to see outside what's going on, who's hanging out, who's coming late, what's the story. So they like to sit there, and they can't really focus. That's that's the conducive seat for those that can't really focus. Says the Mechaber, but clearly, if it's not really a window there that he can see what's going on outside. So that's not a problem, again, to sit by the exit, to sit by the window, to sit in an area where you can't really see what's going on. It's fine. And then there are those that say as well, what it means here, what we're learning in this Maimer is not a vart, that you're not allowed to sit in a specific area next to the door, but that you should wait. You shouldn't start davening the moment you enter shul. Like the moment you get into shul, boom, like the rubber band is flicked and you're off to the races. No, wait a shear of shnei psachim. Wait a few seconds before you start davening, not to show like your mamash and a huge burden that you're having to run out. Benachin lachosh l'chol pirushin. Chabad finishes off. It's good to be chayshish for everything. Again, this is all the different comments that are brought down by Ben Yonah. Okay, continues the Gemara. The Gemara says as follows. So we're continuing on this idea of ki moitzi moitzachayim. Those who find me find life itself. Now the Gemara says a number of examples, a very, very famous Gemara on what it means to find life itself. What is life itself? You want to know, we distill life itself down into one line. What would you say? No, sorry, I skipped. The next, the 2 dots. Pasuk tells us in the Hillim, every chassid should daven to you for the time that he's going to find. Again, the pasuk tells us in Mishlei that the idea being finding me is like finding life itself. The chassid is davening for the eis mitzvah, for the time of the finding. What is this time? What is he finding? So the Gemara now gives a whole series of examples, as Rashi points out. A person should daven that all these things should be found by him when he needs them. What are they? Person should daven that when he wants to get married, he should be able to find a wife. Right? There's so many situations now of older singles that they didn't find a spouse. That when you want to get married, you should be able to find a spouse, the karev. So that's first example. That's what it means, and that would refer to the idea. The Gemara tells us Gimel about the idea that somebody who's not married, sure, simcha, this, that, right? He doesn't have a life without being married. Doesn't have a life. So this is what it means. B'ma Rava, and in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, they would say kinos inish itza, when a man would get married. Amri lehachi. They would ask him matzah or matzah. No, were you matzah or matzah? What does it mean? Matzah, the siv matzah, isha matzah tev. Well, on the one hand, matzah is a reference to the idea that somebody finds a wife, is found good, and he's gotten the will from the Rebbeinu Shalom. Says, what did I find worse than death was a wife, right? So on the one hand, they asked the matzah or matzah, and obviously the right answer for any Talmud Chacham would be to say matzah. If he said matzah, especially to a family member of the wife, forget it. You're going to cause disasters, right? Okay, so the idea being, again, is this vart of finding a wife is finding life itself, and that was the vart of Rabbi Chanina. Now we have another one. Rabbi Nassan Omer, what does Rabbi Nassan say? Le'es mitzvah zu Torah. Right? What does it mean, le'es mitzvah? It's Torah. That it's going to be at a time a person wants to be able to learn, should be able to find learning easy, should be able to find the nachas ruach in learning, be able to find the right kind of rebbe, the right kind of shir, etc. Shenemer ki motzah motzah chaim. Again, the same pasuk. The idea of finding me, in this case, finding me through Torah, is finding life itself. Torah is the Torah's chaim, etc. Finish the Gemara. Another one. It's a reference to death. What does it mean? It says Rashi, a person should die in a good death. You have certain people that mamish the last years, the terrible, terrible, terrible. We dive, and when it's time to go, when Father Time finds us, no, it should be able to go out easily. We have a Bryce like this. The 903 different types of deaths in the world. He's saying that's random. How do you get to 903? We'll have to spend another time to talk about the gematria, purpose l'chachma. Can't get into it now. But for now, we'll just say the math is correct. Teitzos is gematria 903. And since we're talking about lamut teitzos, that there's 903 different ways to leave. And there are bad ways and good ways. Kasha shebekula and askara. The worst type of death is askara. Necha shebekula and nashika. We all know about Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, right? They got Mrs. Nashika, but that is only reserved for the most special ones, right? I remember my father telling me about this Gemara when I was a kid. There was a person in the shul, he was a candy man, Bachi, right? The Hungarian, right? Is like the uncle, right? So he would give candy, and when they didn't come to shul, I said to my father, "Why is not shul?" He said, "He died. He died. He was fine. He was there in shul yesterday." He said, "Yeah." He went home, Shabbos morning, took a nap, and didn't wake up. That's the way. My father said that. I remember I was a little kid, 10 years old. He's like, "That's the way I want to go. That's the way to go. That's the way to go." Yeah, to die on Shabbos, Mamish after he had his challenge, went to bed. It's perfect. There's no better way to go. He's an older man, no pain, no nothing. Whatever it was, it was. Yeah. So the more then explains what is Askra saying such a terrible death. Askra damya de chazira bigvava de amra de latoy nashra. What is it like? It's like a thorn in a bigvava de amra, in a ball of wool, de latoy nashra, that's being pulled out. So you have to get out the thorn out of the ball of wool in order to be able to use it. When you're pulling out the thorn, what's going to happen to the wool? It's going to be all attached. So it's like when you're taking away somebody's neshama, it's like it's hurting everything. It's like ripping up the whole ball of wool. That means askar. That's why it's such a terrible thing. It's like pulling out a ship's rope through the hole, right? You know the ship's ropes work. They in order to be able to anchor the ship, to hold the ship, you got to pull through the hole, and it's obviously very tight, and in order to hold the ship, and so therefore, again, the same idea that it is quiet, tight, and therefore very painful. I should mention that Rashi tries to explain what does it mean kippur b'fi veshet. Rashi starts telling you about his knowledge of the Atlantic Ocean. Rashi says the yamu kainas yesh b'mekamish ein mekabel barzel. The places in the Atlantic Ocean where they don't take barzel. Rashash explains what does it mean they're not taking barzel. In other words, they're trying to anchor up the ship, and you can't anchor up the ship because of the fact that the Rasha says that there are sort of anti-magnet rocks. Again, what kind of rocks are those? I don't know. but rocks on the bottom of the floor, then when you're going to put out the anchor, right? If you look in Merchus Sfina, so there we talk about what the things that you sell when you sell a ship. One of the things is the anchor of the ship. You need it's part of the ship. So the anchor won't anchor because the rocks are going to be pushing it back. They're not letting it get in. Normally, when you want to anchor up in the bottom where the anchor will get stuck in the thing and it'll hold the boat. Here it can't hold the boat. So what do you have to do? You have to take other sort of ropes and tie them to the ship and be able to slow the boat down from moving. So when you put those ropes in through the holes on the boat, it's going to be very tight and it's going to be creaking and cracking and ripping. And so therefore it's very painful. I should just mention that the Amud Kindness has all types of unbelievable lines we find in Ma'amar Chazal, Mekshanim. Just to mention one, there's an Ibn Ezra in Parashas Shmos, Parashas Boy, in relation to the Makkah of Cheshach. So the Ibn Ezra is explaining the darkness that it was mamash. It was so terribly dark, right? So the Jewish people, they had light. The Ibn Ezra says, I'll give you an example. This is on the Yamuk Kindness. Sometimes it's so dark that you don't know if it's day or night for 3 days. And sometimes even for 5 days. And he says, and I saw this many times. So what does that tell you? Number one, the Atlantic Ocean has a lot of times when it's very foggy and you can't tell if it's day or night. Number two, you see, Ibn Ezra was an indifferent traveler. He was always going around. So moving on. So we just now discussed the terrible death, which is the Askara. And the Shika, what's the Shika? It's a good death. It's like removing a hair from milk. It's easy. It's quick. It's painless. Rabbi Yochanan Amar le'es mitzoy zukvura. He wanted a different one. Le'es mitzoy. What are you davening for? For a good burial. Amar chanim my cross. Meich malai gilia sisu kim cover. What does it mean? Those are happy. They're rejoicing when they find their grave. So the idea is Amar Rabbi Bar Shila. Remember Rabbi Bar Shila, our very first Amar we mentioned Shas on Beis at the top. So Rabbi Bar Shila tells us Hainu darbi inshe liboy inshe rachem. A person should daven for rachem afilu ad zibula basraisa. Right, until the last clod of earth goes on his grave, he should daven for peace. As Rashi says, "Shehele shalom kolim mechai." He should daven for shalom all his life. Af b'yom kivrasa, even on the day of his kivura, he should daven for shalom. Ad hashlachas afer achronin shebekisa kivrasa, until mamish the last cloud of earth. I remember this Gemara when I think about the Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg who passed away maybe 50 something, 60 years ago now, and at his funeral there was a fight where he was going to be buried. Fight, right? Because there were those who said he belonged to one world, others said he belonged to a different world. Mamash, a fight at the Kvura. We don't want, none of us from Mitzvah should have that kind of a problem, but that's what we mean when we say Rabbi Shila is telling us davening even until, or Rabbi Yochanan is saying, until the last cloud of earth. You should daven for a good bathroom. As I say, life without Charmin is not Charmin. Okay, the point being, says Rashi, because in Bavel they didn't have good places to go to the bathroom. The land was more muddy. Remember this in the south. Saddam Hussein killed out all the marsh Arabs, killed out hundreds of thousands of these marsh Arabs lived in the southern part of Iraq. The areas were near the water, so it was very marshy. As it turns out, from the environment, it's an amazing thing. Think about the Everglades here in the U.S. It's an unbelievable area for the environment. But in terms of imagine the old days for a bathroom, to find a bathroom you could sit normal, have a normal situation, it's not normal. It's very difficult in Bavel in those areas. Bavel, the south part of Iraq, and the very marshy areas. Now, I love the last line. Ari Marav, you know what they said in the West? You know what they said in Israel about this? Where Mazutra said that's the most important thing. You have a good bathroom, you can have life itself. Everything else, all right, it's important, but first you have to have a decent bathroom. Amalei Rav and Bar Papa. Rav said to Rav and Bar Papa, Mahani Milsa Mashadamri Mishmei Rav Chizda Mimil de Beknishta. Tell us some good vertlach from Rav Chizda when it comes to issues of shul. Why? Because Rav and Bar Papa is a student of Rav Chizda. Later on, if you look at Chapav and Aleph, we're going to have a mimer from Rav from Bar Papa, the name of Rav Chizda, as it relates to davening by Beis Akisei. Not getting into that now. So yes, tell me something nice about Rav Chizda said about shuls. Rav Chizda said, what does it mean Hashem loves the gates of Zion more than all the other places of the Jewish people? Hashem appreciates, as it were, the gates that are opened up to davening, to learning, Yes, but the Knesias and but the Midrashas, more than even the shuls and the base madrashes. What do you mean? Hashem appreciates the gates of Allah more than the base madrash? Yeah, because there's places of learning where they don't learn al pi halacha. They don't learn lumam naslasas. They don't learn exactly the way one ought to learn. Look at the Maral, 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 everywhere. Maral again and again rails against those who learn at pilpul. That's nothing to do with halacha. There's a different kind of pilpul in those days. Can't get into that now. Polish pilpul, as the kind of example he was referring to, we can't delve any more into it, but what Hashem appreciates, and Ravad Yosef was wanted to quote this Gemara, is the difference between him and the Sephardic way of Limud and the Ashkenazim is Lumah of Naslas, Lumah of the Halacha. That is the goal, is to be able to reach halachic conclusions. And what do the Ashkenazim have to say has to wait for another time. What did Rav Chia Bar Ami say in his name? The of Ula, in the name of Ula, Miyam Shachar Beis HaMikdash. What does Hashem have in His world? So since the destruction of the temple is only the four amos of halacha. Rabbi says in the beginning, I used to learn in my house. I'm still in the Knishna, and I daven in shul. And then when I heard this word Rav Chia Bar Ami in the name of Ulam, only has in His world only dalet amos of halacha. I only daven where I learn. Right? Obviously, I was learning la halacha. Rav Amir Vasi, remember we had already 2 pages ago, right on what do you call on Bavim base. We talked to Rav Amir Vasi, the Amrit Tavayos. So you see, they do things together. Rav Amir Vasi, Afagav, the Havilik Tleis a big Sinishtim Tveria. You know, there were 13 other shuls in Tveria. Mas El Bein a Amud Hechad Havigarsi. They only daven where they learned, because again, this idea of Hashem, Shem Atzion Ba'alacha, this idea of Hashem is loving the Sharit Tziyim, which are the Shem Atzion Ba'alacha. Hashem appreciates those that learn lahalacha, and that is where they wanted to daven. One more line. Let's finish up. Another line from Chibar Ami and Ula. Gadol and Migia Kappa. Yes, greater somebody who is having success from the work of his own hands, more than somebody who just fears heaven. Right? Because when it comes to Yarei Shamayim, the pasuk tells us, praise the person who fears God. But somebody who's nana from his own works, you see that somebody who has success from his own hands, it says, he should be praised in this world and in the next. By Yer Shamayim, it only says Ashrei. It doesn't say Ashrecha v'toivlach. It just says Ashrei. So you see, it's even greater than a Yer Shamayim, somebody who works and has success of his own on his own. Last lines. One more line from Ula. Rabbi, a person should always live where his rabbi lives. She calls Masha Shimon Ger Kaim. When Shimon Ger was alive, then Shlomo HaMelech did not marry the daughter of Paro. Remember, there was major issues between Shimon and Ger and David Melech. Can't get into that now. Says the more about Tanya Alida, but we learned out that you shouldn't live in a place where your rabbi lives. The more says no, like kasha, the kaif, it depends if you, in fact, you are kaif to your rabbi or you're not kaif to your rabbi. If you're kaif to your rabbi, in other words, if you submit to him, so then you can live in the town. If you don't submit to him, then leave, because otherwise you're going to cause major problems. Last line from Rav Huna Bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Menachem. This is not the same Menachem as we learned in Mishnah Chagiga about Nichnas Shammai after Menachem left, a different Menachem. That one left to go to the wars, whatever, a different topic. Amar Ami Ba'idach Siva Izvi Hashem Yuchlu. What does it mean? Zemaniach Sefer Torah V'yotzi. Somebody who abandons the Sefer Torah and walks out in the middle of laning. Rabbi Avo Nafik Ben Gavra Gavra. Rabbi Avo, approximately Halacha, you're allowed to leave Ben Gavra Gavra. Boy, Papa Ben Psukim Psukim. What in between Psukim? Take it. We don't know the answer to that. Rav Sheshes Mahada Api Vigoris. Rav Sheshes would turn away his face to learn during laning. They do what they do, they're laning, and I'm learning. Taisus, a long Taisus here explains, based upon the riff, I was talking about the situation when there was a minion. They couldn't be that you just abandoned the laning to do your own learning. No, it has to do with a regular minion. Also, you wouldn't bring it loud to be in any way be hurting or interrupting the rest of the people who are davening and listening to the laning. Obviously, if not mafriya to them, and you're doing it quietly, and there's a minion that's without you, then it's not an issue, says Taisus. Have a wonderful day.